So we're joined today in the studio by the latest, and some would say the greatest, of the announced challengers to incumbent United States Senator Lindsey Graham. Paul Dans, I want to thank you for joining us, man. We were at your event in Charleston earlier this month. You held your event at the Old Exchange and Provost Dungeon in Charleston, the very room where South Carolina signed the U.S. Constitution. And you said at your event, "We've got a country to save." Before we go into your background, I wanted to ask you real quick, how do we do that? Given how divided we are as a nation, given the fractures within the Republican Party, the ruling party in Washington, D.C., how do we save this republic?
Sure, Will, and it's a pleasure to be with you and the audience here at FITSNews. Look, this state has one of the best records over the last 250 years. The number one way we're going to do this is courage. It's that Carolina courage. And, here coming up on our 250th anniversary, we have to look back at some of these heroes, at the Francis Marions, at the Thomas Sumters, at these group of men and women who stood up for this country. That is what this ultimately takes. This is a great American experiment, but it's of putting the people running the government, a government of, by, and for the people. So it ultimately just takes the courage of people to come forward and do this work. And that's what I'm doing today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the experiment and your family's history. I believe you said your parents are the first English-speaking family to come over, proud immigrant tradition.
Sure.
Said they fought the wars, made those sacrifices. Give us a little bit of your background, where you're from, how you wound up here.
Sure. Well, I was blessed with great parents and really great families. My both sides of my family were immigrants. They landed, my father's side at Ellis Island, Spanish and Italian at the turn of the 20th century. And, they came with nothing. My dad grew up in a cold water flat, which is a building without even hot water. And it was torn down and they built the housing projects. But they did the dirty jobs. My grandfather was a merchant marine. He was at sea for 40 years. So he was a hard scrabble guy. He was a marine engineer. And like I said, they went on to fight all the nation's wars. In his case, he was at the Murmansk Run, which was one of the most perilous. That was where the convoys went to essentially restock the Soviet Union. And they were sitting ducks out there in the North Atlantic. So if you want a definition of what a man is, and sometimes our Supreme Court can't even articulate what a woman is, well, my grandfather would be the definition of a man. Those were the guys who didn't even get veteran status until 1989. But that's how they fought. They're a very proud group of people, very humble heroes. My mom's side, they were French Canadian immigrants who had come down again at the turn of the century, and they worked in the textile mills. So these were my mom was the youngest of 8, and their first language was French. Believe it or not, she grew up speaking French as a first language in Rhode Island, but they were the ones who ran those textile mills. You talk about the Battle of the Bulge and those guys out there, the Band of Brothers freezing. Well, that worsted wool was made by my grandfather, and that was the group that really worked to make sure we had the armament to win. Her 4 brothers and ultimately what would become her brother-in-laws all went off to fight the war in World War II. Behind enemy lines, they spoke French as their first language. So they actually dropped in and they could take off their clothes and blend right in. So they landed at Normandy. These were the kind of heroes I grew up with. These were just my uncles in the folding chair on the 4th of July. So I kind of come from this great tradition of blue-collar workers. They came home, they worked at Sikorsky, they worked only, various machining jobs to see their factories shipped overseas. Mm-hmm. And my parents, for their part, were the brains. They were the ones they fought the war for. My dad went off to military school. He graduated college at 19 and medical school at 23, ultimately became a professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins. He was a Vietnam vet and served in the public health service. He was a lieutenant colonel. He met my mother in Washington at the NIH. My mom was a genius, and she was a concert pianist. She was very, very bright, the first ever to go to college in her family. And so they were introduced by the parish priest in Washington. And we moved around. My dad was in academic medicine, so I wouldn't quite call him a social justice warrior, but he was always more concerned with the people and making sure people got medical care. And so where my grandparents had been these kind of New York, hard hat, they were Goldwater Republicans. They were the ones who were very Reaganite 1980s, where my parents were gravitating that way. We were Catholics, ethnic Catholics, and ultimately we got squeezed out of the Democrat Party.
Now, you said you were a Perot guy, ideologically
I was Perot
coming up
early on. I went K through 12 public schools. I was recruited to go to MIT, and I kind of evolved, if you will, at MIT. I saw that was a school that was built by the military industrial complex. So there were a lot of like the best and brightest from middle class families from all over the US. And at the time, I never grew up on the country club with kind of the Bush set. And it was a foreign thing to me. So when I listened to H. Ross Perot talk about the giant sucking sound, and I saw it with my own eyes, my own uncle's mills had been closed. And that's where I said, this is the future of America. This is what we have to wrestle with. This deindustrialization is being born on the working man. They bought the houses by those factories, only to have the things ripped up. Their entire lives are built around those towns.
There's a ton of that in South Carolina.
It's all over South Carolina. It was all over the whole U.S., where the working man and women were left holding the bag. And this seemed completely wrong to me. I really liked, H. Ross Perot. He wasn't a professional politician, but he just told it like it was. He was the one, sponsoring those Marines to go in. He's just a badass. So, yeah, that was the beginning of my evolution, really towards ultimately the Republican Party. But I felt, people like Donald Trump. I was also very early to Donald Trump. If you remember, even in those days, he was being pushed around as a possible candidate. But like I say, my grandparents, for their part, had grown up in New York City, and the malaise in that city, to see somebody like Trump come around and basically said, no more, I'm doing this. And he had the bravado. But that bigger than life thing is a little bit New York. You kind of need that in life. So that's how we got to where we were. I always look. I grew up south of the Mason-Dixon line. Grew up in Maryland predominantly because my dad was a doc at Hopkins, and it's southern up there. People don't realize that. I think that where I grew up is a lot more found here in South Carolina today. This really is a citadel of values of God, family, and country. And our territory has kind of shrunk. But ultimately, we have to push back. In my case, I fell in love with a Southern girl up in New York City. My wife, Mary Helen Bowers, she was a professional ballerina. She's a prodigy. She went up to New York at age 15. She grew up here outside of Charlotte. Her parents, had been here for their family hundreds of years. They were dairy farmers in eastern North Carolina. And Mary Helen and I ran into one another. And I guess we kind of stood out like sore thumbs in a way. Well, she was a very attractive sore thumb, but we were in that kind of sea of blue, two kind of red spots. And we were very attracted to one another. We obviously, the kind of Southern, that's what I'd grown up with, and really felt a kinship to her family. We ultimately got married here on Johns Island in 2007. So our dream, when we sat down, was one day we'll raise a family and we'll come to South Carolina. And that's what we did. We moved here in 2018. My in-laws, for their part, I'd like to say, they escaped communism. they moved over from Charlotte Mecklenburg to
Mhm.
Fort Mill when they retired. My father-in-law is a retired CPA, and my mother-in-law worked in the Charlotte Mecklenburg schools for 40 years as a reading specialist. But they had enough. They couldn't take one more day of the Charlotte Observer, so they came to Fort Mill, and we discovered Fort Mill, and it was really this amazing part of life that I could tell Obama hated through and through. It was like families were number one. People were like happy in life. They're making the most of it. People from all over the U.S. are joining with the native South Carolinians and basically going to church on Sundays and working with schools. They're building new schools. And we were like, this is kind of a paradise. So we were having 3 kids by then. Over the years, I'll tell you a little bit more about my wife's company, but she built a famous international company in bar fitness. She trained Natalie Portman and Black Swan and basically developed an entire genre of fitness that's sold in 130 countries. But we were developing that, seeing how hard it is to be a businessman and woman, really, and all the regulations, and worst of all, being in New York and saying, look, we have to focus on our family. So we ultimately ourselves escaped communism, if you will, and we came for the values. Like, we got to South Carolina and we're like, this is what we want. We could have lived anywhere in the country. And we're like, no, we're going to live 10 minutes from Mimi, and we're going to come here and raise our kids right. So that's a little bit how we got here. But, it's like I like to say, I wasn't born here. I'm not going to hold that against my mom and dad. I felt, that was the day when I was born was an important one to spend time with my mom. So I couldn't just scoot off to South Carolina.
Well,
but
you may not have been
yeah,
born here, but the project that has made you a household name in conservative circles, if I'm not mistaken, was
that's
born
correct.
here in the kitchen up in Fort Mill, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the
Project
birthplace of Project 2025. Maybe historians will argue one day whether it was Fort Mill, South Carolina, or Charleston. That's because over that year we were actually moving down to Charleston. But I think the ones who said Fort Mill would probably be more correct. A lot of those values, like, to back up, I'm an outsider. I went and practiced law. I went to the University of Virginia for law school after I had graduated from MIT, and went up to the Big Apple there where my grandparents had just recently passed. But that seemed the thing to do. And with the massive debt I had, I think I had to pay like $1,000 a month. I didn't much have a choice, to go to these big firms. But that's where you get the skills.
And you had a huge case up there too, the Chevron Ecuador case, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And I believe you remarked about how that was one of your first glimpses into how the other side operated. Tell us a little bit about that case.
Yeah, that is a famous case. It's called Chevron Ecuador, and it ultimately was a $27 billion, really a shutdown of audacious fraud. I worked on behalf of Chevron, basically unraveling this fraud. But the perpetrators of it are the same people who populated the Obama administration. These are the same people we're doing battle with in Washington. They're very smart. They're essentially Marxists. Their ends justify the means. And in this case, they had tried to take this environmental damage in Ecuador, which was done by the Ecuadorian oil company, and pin it on Chevron. And they were working in league with New York trial lawyers and a kind of a corrupt socialist regime in Ecuador to phony up a judgment against Chevron and then palm it off. So it became a massive cause célèbre. My innovation was, I came to the case late, and they were going down the pike for a $9 billion judgment. And I realized that the plaintiff's attorney had commissioned filmmakers to shadow them. This was at the height of reality television, and they had filmed all the machinations and all this background. I remembered a case from law school called Food Lion, where the producers had come in and basically they were upset that Food Lion wasn't unionized, so they were coming in and they were faking it. They were putting meat that had been rotten and trying to sell it and try to blame it on Food Line. So I knew that oftentimes the truth is in what they call the outtakes, the cutting room floor. And I was like, well, we need to get our hands on the cutting room floor of that documentary because I'm sure they filmed some really untoward stuff. And that's what I did. People said, oh, you can't do that. There's qualified privilege. This is not possible legally. And I sat down with all this other very smart lawyers. And I said, no, this is exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to drive right through this. There's a hole in the federal law, and it's there's a balance here. In my case, I was defending some Chevron in-house attorneys who were being criminally prosecuted. So the law ultimately that makes a weighing between the interest of the criminally accused for exculpatory evidence, which is very strong. It should always be very strong, and this qualified immunity of a journalist to basically protect some of the source material. And we made the case that the criminally accused outweighed the latter. And sure enough, we got our hands on the smoking gun evidence. And rarely do you see people filming it, but they were down in the jungles saying, we're going to write the opinion, not you, judge. And they wrote it in Boulder, Colorado. They translated it into Spanish. They handed it off on a zip drive. So it was a massive fraud, and it totally unraveled the thing. By the end of it, 5,000 lawyers were working on the case, but we ultimately, ran down a guy named Donziger, who was the ringleader of this, but he was basketball buddies with Obama from Harvard Law School. So this is what we're dealing with, but they were very smart. And again, that was where Chevron, they took my idea and they went with it, and they had the resources to do it. So often in life, you don't have the resources to fight the good fight, and all the things clicked. But that's what I was doing in New York, and like I say, we were working with Mary Helen and the business. We had the 3 kids.
She was doing 10 seasons, I believe,
That's right. She was recruited at 14. She was, the kind of the ballerina next door, just on a suburban cul-de-sac, who, she was recruited to go to what they call the School of American Ballet the first time. And her parents were like, no way, you're 14. They hadn't had somebody go across the Mason-Dixon line probably for 150 years in that family. So there was not a lot of like, you're going to go up north kind of
we met her when she introduced you for your run.
Yes.
You know the expression in the South is outkicked your coverage. You heard that expression? You probably are going to hear it a lot in the coming months. She's a remarkable woman, man.
She is. Thank you so much. Yeah, she's my great accomplishment in life, was finding a life partner. I'm blessed. She obviously went up there after she got the scholarship a second time. They said, well, you're going to take it because we're not giving it a third time. And then, she went up and joined the company at 16. So that's, you imagine 1 million little girls or more starting ballet, maybe 4 of them in a good year make it into New York City Ballet. So this would be like, starting pitching at the All-Star game or something. That's the level of, her professionalism. But she started working 70-hour weeks. So when we ran into one another, this was a woman who had already basically been at work the same level I was working, even though she was younger. So I was a big Trump fan, like I was saying from the jump. I was a H. Ross Perot guy. I had basically given up on politics. I couldn't hold my nose anymore with McCain and Romney. And I'd been like a loyal soldier out there at each presidential election. I actually was in Ohio on the ground in 2004. That's where the whole thing turned for Bush. They were trying to steal it. I think a lot of us in Toledo, Ohio, the attorneys were able to stop that. If you remember, he won by essentially less than a college football stadium for the whole country. So Ohio went for Bush, and,
you were in a key place in 2016 too.
Yeah, well, that's
you were in
right.
Pennsylvania, where Trump won by less than 50,000 votes, less than 1% of the vote. You were fighting
I was
that
in
battle.
the ground. I was working in the war room in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Allegheny County, which is the core of where Trump's support came from, that kind of Appalachian coal trail running up, that seam that builds this United States, that great kind of southern yeoman track that reaches all the way down Appalachia. And we flipped, we increased the vote from 20 to 40%, and you could just feel the groundswell. But it was a shocker. But like I said, I remember being there when, on the 16th in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, it was a big rally for the boss. And this was when the news dropped that Comey was not going to go after HRC. And it was like a gut punch. But for those of us who believed it, it was just an amazing night. It was the president had been flying all over, and he came in about midnight, and you could just feel that in the morning there'd be victory, that there were people praying on the plane, and this was going to happen.
But after he wins, you watch as all those Bush country club Republicans that you'd basically been fighting against this whole time walk right in, get all the jobs, start exerting all the influence in the first Trump administration. How did that make you feel? And I want to ask you the other question is, was that sort of the real genesis of Project 2025, keeping that from happening a second time?
Well, I thought there were so few of us who were early to Trump, and I was maybe a little naive that like just doing the work and showing up was going to be enough. Like you said, I had worked on a group called the Federalist Society, and I was the chapter president back in the University of Virginia. So I was really quite a true believer, idealist. But like I said, when I got up to New York and we're getting choices of John McCain and being told Romney is the future of the party, I'm like beginning to say, this is enough with the politics. I have to make my way with my wife. We have a business going. And then Trump appears. I wanted Trump to run in 2012. I'm one of the guys that's like, he's going up to New Hampshire. He's going to announce or whatever. And it was the birth stuff. So that said, yes, it was disconcerting to see kind of the old guard move back in. And honestly, what it was the entire Romney readiness project. And that was the presidential transition project for Romney.
Binders full of
women. They went right into place. So as if Trump won over Romney, but the Romney people all filled the slots. And even more than that, the first question on the application was, have you ever served in government before? And if you hadn't, basically you went into another pile. So they were intent on putting basically the old Bush staff back into place. And, I think there's an office called the Office of Presidential Personnel, which is the key office that staffs these political positions. And he literally, somehow people convinced the president to put the same woman in charge who had staffed it for Reagan, for both Bushes, et cetera. So you were just getting the regular retread Republican in place. And many of them had been the most vociferous anti-Trumpers. So it was going to be very, it was setting up nicely for the impeachments and all the kind of infighting that followed.
So you were also on the front lines during the 2020 race. You were down in Georgia, I believe, in the aftermath of that one. I remember you made a comment, said it wasn't a race that we lost, it was a race that was stolen from us. So you got that taste of losing, I guess, in your mouth now.
Yeah.
Walk us through that 4 years following that defeat and the run-up to the 2024 campaign where, again, your life's work, this project, which has, many would argue, paved the way for some of the greatest successes of Trump's second term. But at the time, Trump distancing himself from the project and from you.
Well, I think probably a number of people played sports here or have rooted for him. And I say that one of the best experiences you can have is a massive loss. Just that feeling of going back, like losing the championship, the utter kind of, you have to recalibrate. But you have to absorb it in the moment. And that's where this whole participation trophy thing really hurts kids. But it's ultimately, how do you come back from it? I saw it with my own eyes. Okay. Many people, blessed are those who have not seen but have believed. But I'll tell you, in the case of election, I'm a complete rigged and stolen guy because I seen it. I was again, I was working in the Trump administration, and we can talk a little bit about it. But I took over an agency. I'm really this whole fighting spirit now. I was one of the first to ever take over an agency, liberate it, and claim it for the president. That was at the Office of Personnel Management. But I was in the White House the evening of the election. We were watching it at PPO. We thought at some point we thought we got this. We were always like, he's going to win it if it doesn't get stolen. And then all of a sudden we put the music on and people turned the thing off. And then it just seemed to freeze. Everything seemed to freeze. People remember this, where we just weren't getting over it. They weren't calling the states, and they were doing this funny business with Arizona. So long and short of it, after that, I was driving home at 4:30 in the morning, listening to the radio and listening to people carrying in the ballots in Minnesota, in Wisconsin. I'm like,
you got a pit in your stomach probably at that point because
like, this thing is rigged. This thing is rigged, and we had been told that people have been sounding the alarm about this, but I knew from being a lawyer on the ground, it's like, the one thing that they needed was to pre-position the lawyers to be ready for this. And I was busy doing the admin stuff. And I was like, I hope somebody's got it this time, because I'm here trying to keep this government going with COVID. I'm trying to take it over and put our people in place. And I don't have the time to volunteer right now. And sure enough, by Wednesday afternoon, I believe it was, or Thursday, it was like all hands on deck. You got to just take, I took leave, I left, and I went right down to Georgia. And I passed through South Carolina, I kissed my wife and kids, picked up the car, and said, I'm just going to drive all night to Georgia. And the irony was I should have just flown, because who would have known that very night they're counting ballots starting at 11 in the midnight. But the reality was what was going on there in Georgia, we had been overrun. They were not prepared. The president didn't even have his own state attorney or a larger national law firm ready to counter this. And I had worked on that Chevron case. That was the biggest RICO case in American history. So I knew the importance of having a major coordinating council with top-notch people in various offices around the country who could turn things out overnight. And we were just basically overrun. But yeah, probably have to take a whole show to tell you what I saw in Georgia. But the bottom line was, the good people had their vote taken from them. And it was a little bit, we recognized the enemy, and it was ourselves. There were a lot of people that we got done in on the inside. So I took the rawness of that, and, I went back to Washington, and then we got hit with the J6, the kind of the entire Fedsurrection narrative. So a lot of that, they atomized us very effectively and kind of sent us home. And those of us who had been fighting the good fight said, we can't let this happen again. We at least have to package what we did here in the hopes that, the next conservative president will be able to pick up the ball from where Trump left it and run with it. And, many of us hoped Trump would come back. I was a Trump guy from the go. I don't think I would have spent the last 3 years of my life going from South Carolina up to Washington every week, kissing my kids goodbye, if it weren't Trump, But that's what we did. We said, we have to mimic what the left does and be ready this time. And that was Project 2025.
I think the quote you gave was that if he hadn't won again, you'd be in a gulag right now.
It's true. I mean, look, we even forget how life was in 2022. This before Elon had X. They were coming after everybody involved in J6, in 2020 election. They wanted disbar. So many of my friends, like a Jeff Clark, these were patriots on the front line who just stood up and have had their lives turned upside down. People were being debanked. We often used to joke, you see that Federal Reserve building getting redone, that's near OPM, and we were like, they're fitting out the gulag for us, for the next go round. It was before they spent the billions renovating it. But I really do think that when we were doing the fighting up there, you have to understand there was a Nancy Pelosi had the House, and it was a little bit different than having both branches of Congress, and the president swept in on the landslide. We were out there fighting the fight, knowing that this could come at us at any time. And I really have to salute the 1,000 people plus that I helped organize under the auspices of the Heritage Foundation. None of this could have been done without the Heritage Foundation. We managed to assemble 109 conservative groups and said, we got to band together. We have to get together on the 70% we agree on, stop this kind of intramural fighting, put it aside, the personalities, whatever. Otherwise, we're all headed to the gulags. Get on the right page.
When things are obviously good with you in Heritage now, I did want to ask, and I don't want to belabor this because we got a lot to talk about with the upcoming U.S. Senate race, but when you left initially, there was bad blood. There were articles written. How would you respond to some of the press that came out when you left Heritage last year?
Yeah, well, the left, what they did effectively, and to their credit, they realized the existential threat that Project 2025 was. And like we basically said, I sat down and I edited the book, and I said, the number one thing we have to do is deconstruct the administrative state. And then we laid out exactly how to do that.
We put the source code.
We put the source code out there, and we published it for free. And the thing had been downloaded 15 million times. And you see it happening every day right now. All these things are coming out of Project 2025. If they didn't come out of Project 2025, trust me, there was a fourth pillar that was kind of close to the vest for the really sensitive stuff. And that's where a lot of that comes from. But the left made it into a massive misinformation campaign. They said, President Trump commissioned it. He didn't. And then they would say things were in it that weren't. So, I think a lot of the pressure built there. And I've talked about what I think the campaign could have handled a little bit differently. I think they actually mushroomed it with Trump's disavowal instead of just politely saying, thanks for the ideas. We'll look at it at some point. That was kind of inartful. But yeah, with Heritage, we had a little contretemps, but that's smoothed over. And what they've been very clear. They walked back any of those things in the statement. We had a resolution, and both the Heritage and Kevin Roberts, who is a great patriot, we're committed to saving this country. There's always going to be dust-ups with brothers. Try to keep them in the house, but the American. I played sports. I've seen teammates kind of go out a little bit. The coach settles you down, and you go that they're on the other side of the V. Let's remember who we're fighting, and that's when I'm happy to say we've moved on.
So all the battles that you have fought over the years against these Leviathan level enemies. I got to ask you now about the battle you're in now. 9-figure war chest likely arrayed against you. A guy who has the president in a vice with this endorsement. He's coaxed from Donald Trump. How do you fight that level of opposition? I mean, is this the biggest challenge you'll faced in your career?
Maybe winning over my in-laws. No, I love Mimi. Look, this is a very pro mother-in-law campaign. Let me be clear with that on the record. No, look, here's the thing I learned that I went right against the deep state. And I was fearless about it. When in Trump 45, I just got into this, what they call the Office of Personnel Management. And there were good people on our side. The president, to be clear, he appoints 4,000 people, but the civil service is 2.2 million. So imagine that the president's appointing one for every 500 workers. And then you figure those 500 workers, a lot of them are drawn from Washington, and they vote like 95% Democrat. So when you go into an agency, it's like 500 to 1. In some sense. So you're already out, man. This is how I play. All right. This is where I swim. This is not being a David v. Goliath is that's my natural habitat. But two, you have to realize that they're built up over time with kind of a false edifice that no one's ever had the courage to challenge them. And when I got into OPM and realized, that there was a director and then 5 associate directors underneath him. And all 5 of these people were career appointees. And I said, well, no, they're doing some of the most important HR work for the entire government. We need the president's policy represented there. So I got rid of 4 of them. Press went crazy. And but then it settled down, and we put the people in. And sure enough, I said, look, this is how the agency was when it was created under Carter and Reagan. Those were always political jobs. You just took it as a given now that that's how it should be. No, we have to never accept the status quo. So I never accept the status quo. I'm always challenging it by virtue of my technical facility from MIT and my legal reasoning from Virginia and from fighting all these big cases. I don't need people to tell me what to do. I can actually pick up the statute and read it myself and get the right advice from trusted aides. So fighting Lindsey Graham is going to be the same as fighting the deep state. Look, we're here to liberate this great state, this Senate seat, and give it back to the people. It's right now in deep state control. And Senator Graham, there's no track record there for a fifth term. I don't know why he was even elected to a second one, but he certainly has championed 3 endless wars. And in the 24, remember, he went off from South Carolina on a pledge of term limits 32 years ago. He is the exact reason why this entire movement stood up. Is if you were going to put like anti-MAGA and the picture in the dictionary, it's Lindsey Graham.
So how did he get Trump in a vice like this? How? I mean,
I think one, he is a master of kind of weaponizing how to win friends and influence people. I mean, he's apparently a charmer, but no one's ever pushed back on him. And the reality is, like, look, this guy's dangerous. He was the one behind the Russia hoax. He's the last one to be investigating this. Yeah. Like,
you've called for folks to look into Graham's connections to that.
Well, I'm looking at him myself. I mean, look, he admitted he was the one who told John McCain to give the dossier to the FBI. And the president might not know that, but even the left is like, I tweeted this out yesterday, like, back up, Lindsey Graham. Like, the reason you didn't investigate this for years when you had subpoena power is you're afraid of what they would have returned with those subpoenas. Like, the people you're subpoenaing were working with you, likely, and we have to get to those answers. Remember, he was out, in December 16, when the president had won. He wasn't out saying, great job, Donald. He was running around about Russian interference. And then he spent New Year's Eve in Ukraine. He came back and he led congressional hearings to solidify the IC findings about Russian interference. He testified right there. That was the purpose of his hearing. So for him now to get up and say, oh, I don't trust the IC findings, it's like, no, we're not buying this here. Like,
But Trump continues to buy it. That's the problem. It's, when is this guy, you mentioned it in your announcement, Graham's a snake.
Yeah.
Why can't Trump see that? Or does he have to have his vote? Does he have to rely on him to get his judges confirmed? I mean, what's the...
Well, the irony here, I think that the endorsement was likely extracted in almost under duress, if you will. If you're the chairman of the budget committee and someone has to pass a beautiful bill and you say, well, I'd like to help you on that, but I'd like your help first on an endorsement. It's, that's a quid pro quo to my mind. But look, the bill never had it never had to be big and beautiful. And what he's essentially, it should have just been a beautiful bill. He's turned into a power broker where he basically brings his Democrat friends along with him. And you see the president when he brings Lindsey on stage, he's always like, when I need a Democrat vote, I call for Lindsey. Well, I appreciate that he may need Democrat votes, but we don't need to be sending that person from South Carolina. Go to Pennsylvania, go to Massachusetts, go to Delaware if you want to get somebody on the edge who can wrangle the left. But this is a red meat, red state, and it needs to have elected representatives who believe in God, family, country. I never run into a neighbor here who is a warmonger like him. And we have not only a South Carolina problem, this is an America problem. Like, he's trying to lead us into a hot World War III.
And it appears to be succeeding with Trump reversing some of his prior positions on the Ukraine conflict. And in fact, one of the things you criticized Graham at your announcement was his legacy was these endless wars, the latest of which being Ukraine. Yet we are seeing now President Trump starting to shift his position. I don't know if it's the aftermath of the Epstein drama or what is motivating this, but now adopting a more neocon tone in his relations with this conflict. I mean, do you see
Look,
that?
it's worrisome. It's absolutely. I think, the president is limited of the information he takes in, and that's the beauty of X, and that he has his own phone and he can watch TV. But it is kind of control. With respect to Lindsey, though, this is a bad habit. And the president, look, none of this happens without President Trump. If he didn't get off that floor and say, fight, 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 we'd all be in the gulags. We'd be Impression City. They'd have us masked up and jabbing us with the next thing. And so full credit to President Trump and his team. And it isn't like the guy doesn't have a million things on his basket, but when you have a Lindsey coming in there, it's like, sir, I know you don't drink and I know you don't smoke, but the worst vice possible is golfing with warmongers. So pick up a stogie, maybe, but like kick this guy to the curb. I mean, my advice, next time you take him golfing and you stop and he goes to look, Lindsey goes to look for the ball in the woods, just floor it. Just roll out, just leave him there. Because hey, these are our kids, and it's not just World War III, it's the profligate spending. Look, the next generation needs a piece of the rock. And, they have leveraged everything to the hilt. They've maxed out our credit cards. All this foreign adventurism is what you pay at the end of the month in your credit card statement. That's why you have 20% interest rates, because the U.S. borrowing has crowded out that private lending capacity. And, why can't our generation get out of a one-bedroom apartment and have a starter home? Maybe because we have 20 million illegals in it. Well, why do we have 20 million illegals? Lindsey Graham. Like, what was he doing in 2017? He was running around talking about Russian interference and this and that. Well, in 2017, we had the Senate, we had the House, and we had the president. We should have built the wall. It was $17 billion. He did nothing for that. Instead, he was trying to delegitimize Trump and slow down everything. If we had built that wall for $17 billion, you think we'd be trillions of dollars later and 20 million illegals? No, it's like, this is a guy who's constantly worked against Trump. And I think Trump's going to learn this. Look, we're going to prosecute the case. That endorsement is going to slip away over time when President Trump learns that Lindsey has been basically ushering him into these troubles. He was the handmaiden of the Russia hoax. It's like a Scooby-Doo episode at the very end, and they're going to pull the thing off, and it's going to be like, Senator Graham, it was you, the Russian hoaxer all along. And, and I try to make light of it, but it's very dangerous stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is a guy, former President Obama called him his best GOP ally, shed tears over the character of Joe Biden. This is a guy who has rolled and sat with some of these Democrats in Washington for a long time.
He was, the second there's a change, he put all Obama's Supreme Court justices on. He actually was one of the great helpers to Joe Biden. You read the articles, he was Joe Biden's man, stocking the court with those very judges who are interfering with the Trump, writing those national injunctions. That was our own senator from South Carolina. It's like, we can't do this in our own name anymore, people. We have to stand up. I'm coming forward. I can't hold my nose anymore to vote for this guy. I can't do it to my kids. I've been not given, but I've worked to this moment in my life where I feel I have God-given blessings, and the Lord's asking me to basically do this. I don't really have a choice, but, I'm not going to sit there and boil with the frogs. I'm the guy who jumps out and says, no, we're not going to take this anymore. And we're not going to take it anymore.
Now, obviously, this is a race, not a one-on-one contest at this point. It's a Republican primary with several folks have announced, including one who is a former two-term lieutenant governor here, a guy who's got some name ID. You were a bit dismissive of his candidacy in your announcement of former Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer. How do you see getting yourself in that position so that this is a one-on-one race? Because I think what you've laid out here,
Yeah.
Paul, is a pretty compelling argument. You're arguing, hey, my blueprint is what Trump is implementing for your benefit. Lindsey Graham's judges are the ones stopping it. That's a pretty effective one-on-one argument. But how do you get it to a one-on-one argument with a credible
Well, I do think that this is the race of the cycle. This is ultimately the battle for the survival of America first. And it's the consummate swamp critter, Lindsey Graham, versus me, the actual proven swamp drainer. I'm a citizen who went to Washington with some skills and, moreover, just the courage to make the change. Look, I salute people trying to go up. Andre, though, I'll give him a lesson from MAGA 101. You have to support President Trump. He endorsed Kamala Harris for president in 2020. So, the internet never forgets, as much as he wants to scrub that.
Well, in a primary, though. I mean, let's give him a little credit. It was a primary.
Look, he, palling
the picture's
around.
not helping him.
He visited 20 foreign capitals with a group of globalists. And it's not just Kamala Harris. This is Eric Garcetti. This is, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. I mean, this is a who's who of like the worst kind of Democrat progressive. So that's who he pals around with. You know where people stand by where they sit, and he seems to be kind of a globalist Trojan horse at base. The bottom line is, like, the fight's been going on here for the last 15 years. Where were you? And that could also go equally for the businessman who's thrown his hat in the ring. If you wanted to make your way to Washington, you could have, like I did. Like, I was in Pennsylvania. I was in Georgia. I never saw either of those guys there. But I know that they didn't try to claw their way up like I did and get into the first Trump administration. That's where the fight's going on. And you need that skill set. Look, I have gone toe-to-toe with the bureaucrats. Like I was saying, this whole ethos of firing recalcitrant bureaucrats and basically reclaiming the executive branch for the president, that started with me and what we did at OPM with the White House personnel. And I didn't accept this as an independent agency. I said, no, this is a constitutional agency under the president. The directive under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1, the executive power of the United States is vested in a president, period. So therefore, the actual federal workforce in the executive branch has to respond to the president. And that was what we did. And I've walked the walk. I'm not a professional politician. I'm not slick, but we can't just take a snake like Lindsey Graham and replace him with a snake oil salesman. The president doesn't need just another cheerleader. He needs a brain who's actually a proven leader in the movement, who's going to help those great senators who are in the minority right now, the Ron Johnsons, the Mike Lees, the ones who are standing up, who need reinforcement. And there's a number of them, to be sure, but they're not a critical mass yet. And I want to join them in the fight.
You've been very generous with your time. I do want to ask you one last question, though. You see the same polls. A lot of folks see some of them public, some of them internal. Lindsey Graham's numbers in South Carolina are not good. He is potentially vulnerable on a number of different fronts. You've also heard the boos when he appears at rallies alongside President Trump. They certainly love their president and they love that MAGA agenda. But when Graham stands up and attempts to cloak himself in that, they see through it. How important is that going to be as you look at this race? Do you feel, obviously you're running, you wouldn't have run if you didn't think there was a chance, but as you look at those numbers and as you hear those boos when you're out on the campaign trail for Lindsey Graham, how optimistic are you that you can pull this off? Is this most important race in the country, as you've said? And I think a lot of folks would agree with you. And there's going to be outside money coming in on this from all directions. But as that critical mass, as we approach that point of critical mass, is there a path to victory for you that you see?
it's for all of us. It's 100% victory over Lindsey. Look, I have the skill set. I'm proven. I'm one of President Trump's top warriors in America First, and I've actually done this. So if it's a question of pick your fighter, I submit to you that I'm ready to go, and I have the track record. I'm basically a Rambo, MAGA Rambo, if you will, but I've been in the jungle fighting for him. Look, the good people of South Carolina know a fraud when they see it, and they tolerated Lindsey, but it's no more. They need Liberation Day, and the boos, yes, they're coming out of Pickens. They're spreading to Somerville. They're heard here in Columbia. They're all over the case. Every time I run into a neighbor of mine and I say, "Look, I'm gonna primary Lindsey," the words are the same. Thank God. And look, I, for better or for worse, I'm fearless, and probably I should have a little bit more fear in me, but I don't see any other choice. This is really the fulcrum of the movement. We can't have Trump flipping the keys to Lindsey Graham. We know this guy is going to flip on President Trump. We know we have automatic Gramnesty, starting the second he gets reelected. And so, everything we are against happens with Lindsey Graham. I need the people to come together and get behind me. I feel them because I'm one of them. I came from all this, and this is what I walk into the office. I feel the weight on their shoulders. I stand on the shoulder of these giants in my family, but their families too. They all fought the wars. They did this work. They made this country great. And I have a little bit of the skill set to make sure that happens, but I only want to be here for the people. I'm not part of a political machine. I don't owe anyone favors. It's just the voters, and that's the promise of this. So look, the numbers for Lindsey are catastrophic as a sitting senator. He's way below 50%. We did the polling on it. With respect to President Trump's endorsement, a majority of South Carolinians, the likely primary voters, think that the president got it wrong. And remember, the president endorsed Mitch McConnell. He also endorsed Lindsey before, only 2 years later, to say that he regretted doing it. The president's fallible. He's not the Pope. He might have made an interesting Pope.
And Republican voters don't always follow his advice.
And what I'm saying is over 50% of South Carolinians say either he got it wrong or it's not going to affect their vote. So this is a case where this state, is first to fight, and we love our President Trump. Believe me, Lindsey's people can search till the cows come home to find a recording of me saying something bad about Trump. Au contraire, mon frère. My family's given everything, and we haven't gotten into this, but my wife got canceled in Hollywood. We went when I went to fight for him in Georgia in 2020. We've been through a lot, and it's because my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, we made this whole thing a family unit where they picked up and helped with the kids, and this is what our country's been doing for 250 years, sending people to the front to fight. So you may not know me because I've been actually up in the front fighting the whole time, coming back to the homeland here in South Carolina. And this is where our family is. And I'm not going to sit here and watch another 6 years of Lindsey Graham.
Paul, appreciate you taking the time, man. Folks, America's blood and treasure. Paul Dans arguing it is much safer with him than it is with Lindsey Graham. We will continue to track this race as it unfolds. And Paul, once again, thank you for taking the time. I
appreciate it. Check us out at pauldans.com. We love your support, volunteers. A little donation will make a big difference. We're never going to match his money, but we have much more fighting spirit.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Will.